I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks. Hello, listeners. This is Ask Amanda Anything, where you can send me your questions and I will answer them. It can be about me, it can be about the world, it can be about philosophy, it can be about what I had for dinner last night. Please enjoy and don't be weird about it. FYI, my husband, Chris, will be the one delivering the questions for you.
I'm going to be weird about it so you don't have to.
Perfect. He's allowed to be weird about it, so that's why we're a dynamic duo.
And as a reminder, I'm going to poke, prod, and playfully challenge Amanda to try and draw out the best answers. Are you ready?
You are not going to philosopher debate me, though, because we know how that ends.
I will not philosopher attack you. That's true.
Yeah. Great. Let's do it.
I don't want to sleep on the couch.
All right. Okay. What do we got?
So, our first question comes from Anonymous. I saw the news that Rudy Guede was sent to trial for sexually assaulting another young woman. I read your book, Free, and I was really struck by the compassion that you showed your prosecutor. I'm wondering how you feel about Guede now, and if you're able to extend the same kind of grace to the man who killed your friend.
Great question. Challenging question right off the bat. Cool. So I actually wrote a little article about this in response to the news because, as soon as that kind of news comes out, people come to me for comment. And you're right. Like, my philosophy on giving the benefit of the doubt and believing in the ultimate good of inhumanity is challenged by someone like Guede. Why is it challenged? Or even just like my philosophy on free will and how it's an illusion is, and how to feel about someone like Guede, both challenges, but also is ultimately informed by how I feel about what he is capable of as a human being. And
before you go any further, can you just give listeners who may not be familiar with Guede the, few sentence background?
Okay, well, if you don't know who Rudy Guede is, then, and somehow are still subscribing to my podcast, he's the guy who actually murdered my roommate. So he's the one who broke into my home, who left his DNA all over Meredith's belongings and body and fled the country. And then after he was apprehended, before he was apprehended, said I didn't have anything to do with it. And then after he was apprehended, he claimed that I did it. So he's the guy who has essentially been, he was ultimately sentenced to rape and complicity in murder, but not to actually having murdered Meredith, nor was he ever even accused of breaking and entering into our house or stealing belongings. So, there's a number of things that crimes that he committed that he never was even charged with, including slander against me and Raphael, all of that. So, generally a bad dude. And if you believe in bad dudes, if you were gonna believe in bad dudes, he would be the bad dude that you would believe in. And he has now since gone on to so after he got out of prison, he was in prison for 13 years. He got out,
which is a small amount of time compared to what that crime would get you in the U.S.
Absolutely, yeah. So first of all, if he had been just sentenced to rape and complicity and murder in the U.S., he might be facing life in prison. So the fact that he got out after 13 years is remarkable. And then, of course, he was never actually found criminally responsible for all of the crimes that he actually committed. So,
and now, the news is that he got into a relationship with a young woman shortly after his release from prison.
Yes, I was getting there.
Okay.
So he gets out of prison. He starts dating this much younger woman who is in her early 20s, who was 9 years old when the trial was going on. So just was completely not aware of his history. And then it was her first ever relationship. And as she recounts it, he was physically violent, emotionally manipulative, stalked her, sexually assaulted her, physically abused her. and has only now come forward because she didn't know what to do and he was stalking her. And so he is now on trial for that. And I wrote a piece most recently about this, about how I hope that people are paying attention and that people are noticing that there is a pattern of behavior of this man who is aggressive towards women, violent towards women, and who is capable of committing these crimes all by his lonesome. He doesn't need any friends to help him out. And I'm noticing that not a lot of people are noticing, because anybody who, I think there's this claim that everyone was really interested in the truth of what happened to Meredith, but I think that so much of the media attention on this case was not actually primarily motivated by an interest to know the truth of what happened to Meredith and the truth about the actual killer. They were more interested in the scandal and this sexualized version of a female on female violence. And that's why so little attention has been paid to Rudy Guede, who is the actual killer. So much, there's very little media attention that's covering this specific case right now. And that's aggravating to me, because I think that his crimes against this new young woman are very suggestive of the crimes that he committed against Meredith. And a part of me is really hoping that he actually is found accountable for these crimes as a kind of belated justice for Meredith and me, because he has committed criminal acts against, by now, the both of us. So how do I feel about this man who has harmed irrevocably people in my life and me, especially considering that I have this stance that, and for those who are not familiar with my stance on free will, I do not think that people deep down have free will, in the sense that I do not think that at any moment a person is free to make any possible choice, right? I think that the choices that we make and the thoughts that we think and the feelings that we feel are all derivative of everything that came before us. And so as that stands, because of that, this idea that we are free and unencumbered to make any possible choice in any given moment is an illusion. Now, does that mean that you cannot hold someone criminally responsible for anything? Of course not. What it means, though, is that your relationship with what you think about the person who has committed the harm shifts. You stop thinking of it as something, that you want to punish someone for, and more it's something that you want to prevent or deter someone from doing. So when I think about Guede, I, in my brain, think he is a person of his own past and history and circumstances. He has, a history of neglect, a history of abuse, history of complicated relationships with women. And as a result of that, he is the kind of person who is violent towards women and who is willing to let other people take the blame and take the punishment for his own criminal actions, which means that he is a dangerous person. He is an unrepented person as of yet. And that's what he has proven himself to be. And I think that while I am never going to take the stance that he is incapable of change and incapable of improvement, and I 100% in my heart of hearts, wish him all the best to become a better and more honest and safer person. I just don't know that if he's capable of that, particularly when he's been able to get away with so many crimes in his past. And so I think that he is a danger to other people. And I don't think that he is capable of the kind of dialogue that I have had with my prosecutor, for example. I do not think that if I were to reach out to Rudy Guede and say, hey, I want to have a dialogue with you, I do not trust him to be honest. I do not trust him to be, to not be manipulative. I just don't trust him.
So you're talking
And
about the difference between someone that you see as holding false beliefs and being afflicted with various cognitive biases on the one hand, versus someone who has exhibited traits of psychopathy on the other hand.
yes, I'm afraid that Rudy Guede is at least unreachable by me. I think that he is very likely grappling with some kind of form of psychopathy. And I do not feel capable of approaching that, nor do I feel any desire to, honestly. And that may be my own failing. But I have no problem acknowledging his, tragic past as being very informative of the person that he is today. That said, I don't know if it is possible to unravel all of that damage that is done to a human being that turns them into the human being that and what they are capable of. So, but also, like, I want to acknowledge my failings in all of this, which is to say that I'm not really interested in talking to him, at least not now in my life.
I don't know that that's a failing. I don't think there's a burden or expectation on you to have to talk to the guy who killed your friend and blamed you.
Yeah, but also, like, if I'm the person who's capable of talking to anyone about anything, then I should be able to do that. And I can see a version of myself that is capable of that, which is to say that I am capable of that. I am capable of entering into a conversation with Rudy Guede. I just don't want to. Because, like, I feel like the what it would cost me versus what benefit it could have are greatly outweighed.
Yeah, for sure. But, to bring it back to free will for a minute, there's a sense in which if you don't want to do something and can never want to do it, you're not really capable of doing it. What does it mean to say you're capable of doing something that you're never going to desire to do? Like, in a very real sense, you're not capable of doing that because you never will.
Yeah, and I think that's a limitation on my part. In the same way that, but also, like, in the same way that I'm not interested in bungee jumping. Like, I'm just not interested. Like, I'm good. Peace. Go my whole life without that.
Let's move on. So
Okay.
Bill asks, how did your Italian develop over the time you spent in Italy? Did you get any help in that regard, or did you have to do it organically?
Great question, because a lot of people talk to me about fluency. And I had a really great conversation recently with someone who wanted to be bilingual, but was struggling because his parents were bilingual, but his parents had been bilingual their entire lives. So they had grown up in a household where they spoke both languages. And so they never had to learn a foreign language. Whereas this guy had grown up in a totally English-speaking household and, like, heard them speaking the foreign language off to the side, but never felt like fully immersed in it. And so he never learned his, historical language, which was Filipino. And so he was like, how do you, but I was like the first person that he had ever met who had become, like, fully fluent in a foreign language when they were older. And the thing that I suggested to him was that
Go to prison.
immersion, well, yeah, I mean, immersion is kind of necessary, I think, for it to really, like, get past that barrier in your brain where you are translating in real time. So there's a moment in your mind, and it's fascinating when it starts shifting, because it's kind of like baby steps where, like, the baby takes a step and then falls down and then takes two steps and then falls down. Like, that's fluency as well. So, like, you'll notice that you stop translating certain things in your brain. But then like you get into this weird state where you're half translating in your head and half just saying the thing, or like you're reconstructing sentences in a new way because the foreign language, like the object becomes before the verb instead of after the verb. It's this really interesting moment. And I found that I started to notice that I was becoming fluent because I was dreaming in the foreign language. I would wake up and be like, wait a second, I was dreaming in Italian now. So how that happened, though, for me was a combination of my own active efforts to study the language. So I had a dictionary in my cell with me, and I took a book that I was really familiar with, Harry Potter.
Which Harry Potter?
It was The Goblet of Fire, so the fourth Harry Potter book. That was the one that was in the prison library. It was in Italian, so now I'm taking a book that I know very well from English, and I'm reading the Italian version of it. So I'm not struggling to know what's happening in the story. I'm just struggling on a sentence-by-sentence level. And there were times where I would just, read through it and sort of let it wash over me and look up words that I didn't know. And then there were other times where I would meticulously deconstruct sentences. I would rewrite them out into a notebook and then rewrite them like word for word, what the word was, like translating the words. And then I would translate that into proper English. So there was like an in-between one where it was like, the book read blah blah blah, deconstructing it that way. And that's the way that I sort of taught my brain to think, oh, this is how nouns and verbs and objects interact in this language. And so that was like me just doing the act of deconstructing in front of me, because I always found that like taking things out of my head and putting them in front of me helps. But then, of course, like the clincher, though, was that I was immersed in people only speaking Italian. And so I was forced to not only hear it all the time, but also forced to communicate it, and to communicate it in fractured, not fluent ways until I became fluent, just by force of immersion. So that's what I would recommend. If you are really, really interested in becoming fluent in a foreign language, I highly recommend reading a book that you are very familiar with from English in the language that you want to learn, and then spending time in a place where people speak the language fluently, and like going out of your way to avoid speaking English as much as humanly possible. And it got to the point for me where I started forgetting English, which is to say, like, I think there's like, if you are immersed enough, like that's the level of immersion that you're looking for, when you are not like, just English is not useful to you anymore because it's not something that's on the table. And as a result of that, some obscure English words might leave your vocabulary, or in my case, the word tow truck.
Carro attrezzi.
Carro attrezzi, yeah.
Yeah.
I just was like, okay. I don't know what that is.
Moving on, Adam asks, in a perfect world, to what lengths would your prohibition on the police lying to suspects or potential suspects extend? The case of Thomas Perez Jr. is a pretty clear-cut example of how sloppy police work and the misapplied use of the dossier method in the Reed technique can result in a false confession. But after watching a number of police interviews of criminal suspects, I'm struck by how even seemingly benign police tactics entail a degree of dishonesty or outright lying to suspects. For example, a suspect in a serious crime might be brought in for questioning under the pretext of an unrelated situation, and the initial questioning might even be a ploy to reconfirm that pretext. And in some cases, the police, having gathered compelling circumstantial evidence, will intimate to their suspect that they have very little information, as if to invite their suspect to lock themselves into an easily disprovable story. While perhaps less likely to result in an unjust outcome, these seem like different versions of lying, dishonesty, or at the very least, lack of transparency. So if you were in charge of crafting new laws for police conduct and suspect interviews, would you try to thread the needle, or would you simply toss out both the needle and the thread?
Ooh, great question. And I am going to point to the fact that there are people who have already answered this question, which is that I think this was I forget who it was who told me this, but it was a prosecutor in California who is like really in like Republican, like law
DA
enforcement.
Vern Pearson.
Yes, Vern Pearson. I interviewed Vern Pearson for the False Confessions series because he's representing the law enforcement standpoint of this issue, which is deception is it an effective tool to get what we want, which is reliable information or easily disprovable information from a suspect? And he argued that deception does not facilitate that. So I do not think, for instance, that you should bring in a suspect under a false pretext. But I also do not think that you should use lying as a means of gaslighting or coercing a suspect into giving you a story. And in fact, I think one of the biggest problems with law enforcement is this idea that you have to convince someone to tell you something. Like, I think, I think the evidence bears this out, that when law enforcement takes less of I'm trying to force a conversation on you, it's instead, I'm here to listen to you. What do you want to tell me stance? Then that's actually where law enforcement begins to have a more reliable and effective means of sitting down with potential suspects and even witnesses. So, because you also don't want to coerce witnesses, right? Like a lot of times this happens when witnesses get questioned by police, is there's very leading questions or suggestions even by police officers of what they want to hear from witnesses. And that ultimately leads to false information or whatever it may be. So instead of law enforcement professionals having this idea that they need to force someone who's sitting in a room across from them to talk, they should instead take the stance of, I'm here to listen. And you'd be surprised, the vast majority of people will talk to police officers if given the chance. Like even guilty people will want to talk to police officers and tell them something. And whether it's true or whether it's not is information for the police then to base their investigations on. If they can easily disprove that someone wasn't at the bar that night, like that's a very easy way to conduct an investigation that doesn't require that you lie to someone. And instead, I think that what I don't think counts as lying necessarily, though, is lack of transparency, in the sense that I do not think that in an interrogation room or even in a, witness questioning, in any kind of conversation with police officers, I don't think that police officers should be required to reveal everything they know and all of their evidence in order to have a conversation with somebody. Instead, what I think that they should do is simply be there to receive information. They're not there to give information. They're not there to make suggestions or to give information, to hand out information to anyone. They're there to ask questions.
Well, in fact, it contaminates their interview if they provide information.
Right. Now, the tricky thing happens where, how do you ask a question without suggesting that you have certain kinds of information? And again, that goes back to the how do you conduct a conversation that's genuinely open? So all of your questions should merely be in response to what is being delivered to you from the person that you're speaking to, from the suspect, from the witness. Just simply, so they say, I wasn't there that night. Oh, okay. Where were you? Oh, really? What time? Just like open-ended questions, not questions that are designed to to pinpoint a specific response, but always open-ended questions that are inviting more information. And that is the best way to catch someone both in a truth and in a lie, because ultimately they're going to say, a liar is going to say something that's going to be disproven. So yeah, I would throw out all deception except for total lack of, transparency.
You might call it active deception, right? Like withholding of information is not deception in this, you're not telling the whole truth. Like in common parlance, there's a sense like if you don't tell your spouse about something that happened on your business trip, that's a form of lying by omission, right? But in this case, we're not counting lying by omission from the police during an interrogation. They're allowed to omit things they know.
Because the relationship between you and the person who is being questioned is not, like, the person who's being questioned isn't entitled to question the police, right? Like, they're not there to obtain information. The police are there to obtain information. So that's the difference. I think that false pretexts for inviting people in for questioning, bad. Anything where it's active deception is both unnecessary and ineffective and immoral.
I think some people might react to the false pretext thing as like, oh, come on, you can't say, oh, hey, we're looking into a missing persons case when actually they're accusing you of some murder, right? What's so bad about that? What's so bad about just like a false pretext just to see what you'll say? They're not pressuring you to say anything. Why is that so bad?
Because you are denying a person their right to representation, and if you believe someone is a suspect in a crime and you are questioning them, that means that they are certain rights are triggered. Now, if you are using a loophole to get around that by saying, "Oh, I'm not questioning you about that murder. I'm questioning you about something completely different, a robbery that happened in a mall," like, you are violating a person's right to not, their Miranda rights, basically, and which is...
And if you just thought they were a witness and didn't suspect them of involvement, then why are you using a false pretext? It sort of assumes that that the person is going to be deceptive towards you. And so you're meeting that anticipated deception with deception of your own.
Right. And in clear violation of what the Constitution has made a human right of all of its citizens. So I don't like when law enforcement tries to not enforce the law to their own benefit. I think that they need to enforce the law of everyone, including themselves. And so don't break the law in order to enforce the law, is my opinion. And there are reasons why we have Miranda rights and all of that.
Yeah, that the alternative to these deceptive tactics is often called the rapport building approach. And I think it's just worth noting that there are downstream effects for the broader community, that when you make a habit of lying to people, whether suspects or witnesses, as law enforcement, you train the populace,
to be to not be communicative with you,
to not
trust you.
Right?
Yeah. Which is the situation we're in now.
And it impacts your information gathering abilities. And just, by the way, the case that Adam brought up, Thomas Perez Jr., it's one of the most fucked up cases of false confessions. You guys can look it up. But this guy was confessed into a crime that didn't even happen, killing, I think it was his father.
Yes, who had just wandered off.
Yeah, and they told him that they were going to put his dog to sleep if he didn't confess at one point. And he eventually broke down and confessed, and then it turned out his dad...
And then his dad wandered back.
Yeah. So, moving on.
Moving on.
Yeah. Kevin asks, two questions from Kevin. Have you ever heard from Laura or Filomena in the years since your trials and definitive acquittal? I just wonder if they haven't come around to see your innocence and regret their part in everything that happened to you.
Great question. I
And
have
remind
never
people
heard.
who
Yeah,
Laura and
okay.
Filomena
So
are.
Laura and Filomena were my other two roommates in Perugia, Italy. They were the two Italian roommates who were older than me and Meredith. So they were 28 and Meredith and I were 20 and 21. So they were older than us. They would also had been friends for a long time. So like of the four of us, they were the closest to each other. And, you know, shortly after the crime was discovered, they were talking with me about getting an apartment together and figuring ourselves out. And, you know, even the day that I was going in for my final interrogation, and by day I mean night, I got a call from Filomena to that end, like talking about, okay, when Meredith's family comes, are we all going to meet them together? How are we going to, you know, all of that, just like making sort of roommate arrangements. And then I was interrogated and arrested. And the next time I saw Laura and Filomena was in the courtroom, where they weren't explicitly accusing me, but they certainly weren't defending me. And they very often were bending the truth to protect themselves at my expense. So one of the things that particularly Filomena did was she downplayed her and Laura's marijuana use because they were aspiring lawyers and they were afraid that their careers were in jeopardy should they admit to being potheads. And so in so doing, in downplaying their own marijuana usage, they made it seem like I was the lone pothead in the house. And I was the only reason that pot was in the house, which is ludicrous because I never bought pot in my entire time in Perugia. I only ever got pot from Laura and Filomena. So like
And they
it was
smoked much more than you, I'm imagining.
Oh yeah. And so like it was.
But this is the context of this is the prosecution using marijuana as evidence that you are some sort of drug addict who would commit a murder. So they're saying,
and more specifically,
right.
like really trying to find some kind of connection between me and the actual killer. And it was suggested that one of the ways that Rudy was getting by, one of his many illegal activities, was that he was a petty drug dealer. And so maybe I owed him money. Like one of the things that they suggested was maybe I owed him money for drugs. And so I arranged to have sex with him to pay for drugs. Like that was just, you know, one of the many just made up things that they were like, maybe it's this. So anyway, in doing that, they kind of threw me under the bus and never wrote to me in prison, never at all tried to communicate with me.
Not just that, but I want to just also linger on the fact that like they would have been strong character witnesses for you. It's not just that they threw you under the bus, it's that they didn't come to your defense and say, Amanda's a nice, normal person who would never do something like this. So
here's what they did. So they weren't dishonest, though. So they didn't completely throw me under the bus. They didn't lie and say Amanda and Meredith fought, for instance. Like they were truthful about that Meredith and I had never fought, that Meredith and I got on well. It definitely felt like the prosecution was wanting them to be more of character witnesses against me, and they tried to stay neutral. Like they wanted to be like Switzerland. They were like, we take no sides. We are just saying what we think, what is the truth, as long as it's not at our own expense. And the truth is that, Amanda and Meredith got along. We didn't have any problems. And she smokes pot, not us, is basically what they did. And I never heard from them again, ever. And that hurts to this day. The one thing that I know recently is that last year when they were starting filming for the Hulu show about my life that is coming out in August, when they went to Perugia to do some filming, one of the people who went to go complain to the mayor about the filming was Laura, who still lives there, apparently, has a family there, all of that. And she went to go complain to the mayor, which suggests to me that either she believes that I'm guilty or she's just embarrassed by the whole affair and wants it to disappear and is angry at her local politician for allowing the city of Perugia to participate in a reproduction of the fact. It's a freaking bummer, though, honestly. I'm really sad about it.
I say tough nuts to her on that because, you don't have to say it. I'll say it. Like, if you're not going to come out and acknowledge the truth after all these years, you don't get to sit there and say, why can't this just all go away and we just never talk about it again? Well, one of the reasons we should talk about it is because people still don't know the truth and don't acknowledge the truth. And she's a prime example of someone personally involved in this, who had a stake in it, and whose actions influenced the trial, who has not reconciled with the truth or with you in any way. So, sorry, Laura. If you don't want this to be a story and your part in this to be known anymore, like, maybe you need to make peace with what actually happened.
Yeah, but to answer the question, like, I would love to have the chance to meet Laura and Filomena again and to talk to them.
Well, I hope they reach out to you. Maybe they will after the Hulu show.
Vediamo.
They should. Part 2, when you told Raphaele of your meeting with Giuliano, your prosecutor, what was his reaction? Did he understand your approach? Did he feel some catharsis in hearing of how you and Don Salo confronted Giuliano? Or was his reaction more like your mom's, overwhelmed by years of trauma inflicted largely by this one man and unable to see him with grace and humane understanding? And then my little addendum here is maybe you should mention the public debate that Raphaele and Giuliano just had and let people know what that's all about.
Yeah, so the way I'm going to answer this question is by saying, first of all, we depict how Raphaele responded to me going and seeing Giuliano in the Hulu show. So I'm going to defer you to the Hulu show that you should watch because it's amazing and it's an incredible scene, because Raphaele had his own response, which is to say that he didn't react like me and he did not react like my mom. He reacted like himself. And I think that the way he responds is also super valid and super interesting. So stay tuned for that when the Hulu show comes out.
August 20th.
August 20th, although that particular scene is from the final episode, so you're going to have to stick around for a few weeks. So most recently, though, you can look this up, I think it might be on YouTube now, Raphaele entered into a live debate with Giuliano in Italy. It was a public event that was moderated by a journalist, and it ultimately ended up being a very embarrassing affair for Giuliano. Raphaele did very well to be very respectful and clear and concise and to not speak over anybody. And Giuliano ended up talking over people and being really agitated and in general just did not represent himself or his positions well. And this debate was kind of a response to me talking to Mignini, because Raphaele, after he saw that I had a conversation with Mignini and was able to obtain new information from Mignini as a result of that conversation, he was interested in what would potentially result from a confrontation, but he was entering it more as a debate and less as a conversation. And ultimately, I think he represented himself very well. We actually chatted ahead of time beforehand to just strategize, how do you ask a question that demands a certain kind of confrontation with Giuliano. A good example of this, for instance, is part of the skeezy things that happened with the trial is that in trying to find a motivation for Raphaele to have committed this heinous crime, one of the things that the prosecution did was they implied that Raphaele was, traumatized by the death of his mom And they suggested that his mom had committed suicide, not that she had died of a heart attack. And Raffaele was like, why would they do that? Like, why would they go into like my family's tragic but completely irrelevant history to try to suggest that I'm like some kind of murderer? Like, what was the point of that? Also, why are you twisting the truth around my mom who is dead, who can't even defend herself? Why are you suggesting that she's committing suicide when she didn't? Like, so I was inviting him to like think of ways to phrase certain questions as like why questions. Like, why did you decide to investigate the death of my mom when it was unequivocally proven that she had died of a heart attack? Like, why were you doing that if you weren't just only looking to find evidence of what you were looking for, which was evidence of my guilt? Like, basically he was trying to say, like, you guys were guilt presumptive. You never considered my innocence. And this is an example of how you were you're trying to find evidence of guilt even when it wasn't there. So anyway, yeah, Raphaele had his own very Raphaele response. And it's going to be beautifully depicted in the show. So enjoy.
Okay. Josh writes, I am a burn survivor and was burned in a house fire at the age of 7 and suffered 2nd to 4th degree burns to over half of my body. Today I attend burn survivor events and conferences and am a camp counselor at the British Columbia Burn Camp for Kids Survivors. Also, I listened to your Flashback Girl episode on labyrinths. Thank you for representing us. I listened to your series on waking up several times last year and feel so connected to the message of identity. I just came back from a burn survivors conference and couldn't help but feel a tear in my identity. How, like I'm sure you've said, I am that saliently worst thing that happened to me, but at the same time, so much more. I wonder how much personal storytelling and reflecting you've had to do to give yourself the courage to live in this paradox, because I've found it very, very hard. The world is constantly giving us reminders of who to be, and many of those reminders are true enough somehow. You tell your story of prison and wrongful conviction all the time, and I'm sure every now and then it will bring to light more insight. But I wonder what the first couple of times were like. How hard was it? Did you initially see a point to writing it to uncover your internal strength at the time? I guess I'm wondering what your writing practice is like and what it's been like. I'm starting to realize for myself I might need to start learning how to tell my life stories, and doing so might entail writing it down myself many, many times. The process is so unique. I can only wonder what it was like for you.
So I don't know if this is true of all writers, but for me in particular, and I think this is true of some other writers as well, you uncover, like you have the story, right? The story is there. But you uncover what the story means in the act of telling it, in the act of articulating it gives rise to understanding and meaning. And so the first time that I gave a public talk about what had happened to me, this worst experience of my life, I was utterly terrified. I meticulously thought through every single word. I carefully crafted what I was going to say. And then when it came time to deliver it, I was basically reading from a piece of paper, this is my story. Because it was just so overwhelming and scary for me, the idea of telling my story to other people, when in the past it had been communicated to me that my voice didn't matter, that no one believed me, all of that. So those first times I stuck very strongly to script, right? Like that was the script that I had crafted, and I stuck to it because it was my anchor. That was the thing that I was holding on to. And I'd worked so hard in the process of life is complicated and there's so many details that you can tell, but a good story has a beginning, it has an emotional arc, it has an end. There are broad themes that get exposed through very, specific details in anecdotal vignettes. And so like you're doing this balancing act between broad strokes and very like minute details. And in those process of choosing what minute details you want, like what scenes you want to paint for people, you're also choosing what kind of emotional and philosophical truths you want to convey about the experience. And initially, those truths were simply the pain, right? Like the pain, that the harm that I had experienced. So I chose things that conveyed what it felt like to me, how I still felt very hurt. But then over the course of time and telling my story in different venues to different people in different ways, I learned also through the act of like Q&A, which I highly recommend, like giving people the opportunity to ask you specific questions about what they're interested, like what angles they're interested about your story, and letting that inform. Like I've always been super surprised by like the kinds of spontaneous answers that I give to a random question that I wasn't expecting, because it unlocks a new like angle of looking at your experience that like triggers new processing and thinking. And it's also okay to say, I don't know what to think about that, but that's like new information for you to think about the next time you're like, oh, I want to tell this story, and I now have a new question that I'm interested in. And so the point being that, like, yes, the sheer act of forcing yourself to articulate your story draws out meaning and draws out philosophy. And I transitioned from really focusing on the hurt to focusing on things that I've learned, and to actions that I have taken in response to the hurt. So that's how my own storytelling has evolved in time. But yes, in those early days, it was very much just like finding the strength and the courage to vocalize this painful experience out loud for which that I had been blamed, like I had been victim blamed for so long. And trying to make, like, my goal was in the very beginning was simply to be, one, believed, and two, to convey my pain in such a way that it was actually relatable or palpable to other people, because so much of my pain had been denied or dismissed. And so that was my goal. And then since then, my goal has evolved. But I think it should really start out with, like, how do you convey the feeling of a thing? That's a really good starting point. Like, what moments in your story really convey the feeling of the thing? What parts of the story break your heart? What parts of the story haunt you to this day? Those are really good starting points for
Go to
those,
where it hurts.
Go to where it hurts, and then craft a greater narrative around those, like, fine detail vignettes.
This question that Josh asks, though, about having the courage to live in the paradox of, in his case, coming from burn survivors camp and like realizing like, oh, I've made burn survivor an important part of my identity. But also I'm not just burn survivor guy, right? And your version of that is girl accused of murder, but also mom and all these other things. I go to
wrongful conviction, camp every year,
So how do you sit with that paradox of having that worst thing, worst event in your life be so a part of your identity, but also transcending it?
I mean, in the same way that, like, I embrace and don't feel limited by being a woman or being a person with blue eyes or being a person with brown. I mean, I think being a woman is more of a close parallel, because there are certain consequences and experiences that are unique to being a woman, that have a huge influence, a huge impact on how you are going to experience life and the lens through which so not just like the things that happen to you, because things happen to me that do not happen to you, Chris, because you're a dude and I'm a woman, and that things are going to happen to me that are not going to happen to you just because I'm a woman. Like,
Like, for example, in any conversation, people will probably listen to what you have to say. They won't talk over you, right? Is that what you're talking about?
So there's that, but also your internal experience of things is shifted because of that interplay between the external and the internal. So I think like as much as being a woman is a part of my like worldview and perspective, also being a wrongly convicted person is a part of my worldview and perspective. And I imagine being a burn survivor is part of your world and your perspective. And I can hold all of those things at once. Have you ever seen Inside Out? There's this thing in Inside Out where there are these islands that are created from like core memories. Like some memories go into, the deepest reaches of your subconscious and never to be seen again. And some memories are core memories. They are memories that are defining of who you are. And they become like the foundation of what are these little islands that define your personality. And there can be any number of core memories that define who you are. They just aren't, and there's never just one, unless you're like a baby. So like you have like, for me, like being a woman is one of those, core and like probably a memory specifically, but like probably multiple memories all mashed up in one. But it's part of my identity that is like a foundational island in the same way that the wrongful conviction is a foundational island that is part of my personality and part of my philosophy and part of the way that I see the world. And it just informs the way that I live at the paradox is I feel informed, not defined by these things.
Great. Okay, we have one final question for you. This comes from Peter. Peter writes, I just finished reading your book. Thank you. What I got out of the book was a life lesson I wish I had learned years ago. The last chapter and the benediction spoke to me at a deep level. Quote, may you accept the apology you will never receive, was so powerful. Can you reflect on that line?
So many people have written to me about that line. I was not expecting that line to strike the chord that it did. In my book, I often felt like there were some things that I were talking about that were like super universal and some things that were probably more specific to me. And that, that apology for the harm that had been done to me was like, felt very specific to me, but it's also a universal thing. And I think that we all are harmed in our life and we're not going to get apologies for that harm. And we have to live with that and we have to be at peace with that. And I don't know, I'm really grateful that inadvertently, subconsciously or consciously, that aspect of my experience resonated with people. And I hope that it's the reason why, one of the best reviews that I got of the book was someone saying, I'm going to keep, like, I have copies of this book to give to friends or family or anybody that I meet who's who's having a hard time and like needs help to like lift themselves up out of a bad thing. And I was just like, oh my God, that means so much to me that like, basically you are taking a version of me and you are giving it to someone else to like help them raise themselves up. Like what a gift, like what a wonderful thing. What a way to leave the world a slightly better place. And they're, helping me facilitate that. And I just like, it was very meaningful to me. So I'm glad it resonated with him.
I want to just draw your attention to the kind of paradox there, because I actually remember, I think during the editorial process at some point, I think there was a suggestion to change that line to something like, may you accept that you will never receive an apology, right? Which is a very different claim than may you accept the apology you will never receive. Like, why did you phrase it in that paradox? Like, what does it mean to accept an apology you won't receive? It's different than accepting that you won't get an apology, right?
Yes. Yeah. I feel like for me, the apology almost has an existence of its own, right? Like it's like the apology that I know I am due feels like it exists out there. like it is a thing that has a real life of its own.
The platonic apology.
The platonic apology is just like out there, and I'm not gonna get it. and that's okay.
But also you're recognizing that you are due that.
Yeah, it exists. Like, it is real and there. And like, it just felt more true. That phrasing that I chose felt more true to how I experience the apology, which is that it very much exists. And I'm almost like comforted by its existence, because like, I know I should get it. I know it's there. I know that in the ideal way.
I think there's another angle to this, though, which is that typically when someone apologizes for something, some way that they've harmed you, it affects your behavior towards them. And people tend to, the common thing is to be cold and closed off, and like, I've put up a wall when someone's harmed me, and I don't tear that wall down or be warm or kind to that person until they've made amends, right? And so when someone offers an apology and you accept the apology, you repair harm, and now you say, okay, we can have positive energy transmission between us again. But when you say that you're accepting the apology that you will never receive, I think part of that is also about how does your own behavior modulate in response to the people who've harmed you.
It's as if you are accepting the apology. Like, you are accepting the apology. Again, like, it already exists.
I'm going to treat you, Giuliano Manini, or Italy, as if you've apologized to me.
I mean,
is that fair to say?
It's not exactly that, but it is not living in a deficit, I think, is the thing that I'm trying to say. I'm not giving credit to Italy or Giuliano for something they didn't do. But I am going to not live in a deficit. That's where I'm coming from.
All right. This was a heavy one.
Yeah. Good questions, everyone.
But
always
good.
So heavy.
Well, thank you again for reaching out. You can submit questions and comments through Substack or through amandaknox.com. And of course, we will prioritize questions from subscribers. Thanks, everyone.
I'm looking forward to being stumped. Stump me.
And I want some silly questions. Let's bring on a few light ones. We need a few light ones.
Yeah. No one listens to our podcast for lightness.
Oh, sure they do. They listen for that snort that you just did.
Yes. The classic snort.
All right. Next time.
See you next time.